Good morning. Happy Monday. Hey everyone, welcome to Catalyst Energies. My name is Dee. Thank you for joining me. I'm so grateful that you're here. Hope you had a great weekend. It's Monday, October 25th, 2021. And this is the Daily Medicine Transmission. Thank you for joining me. Welcome back after the weekend. Welcome to Monday. A special thank you and welcome to my subscribers and my regular viewing audience, regardless of where you find yourself, BitChute, YouTube, Odysee, all of those platforms. I am uploading these transmissions too. So thank you for being here. I appreciate so much of your feedback and the comments and the dialogue that we've been having over the course of the growth of this project, really. So thanks for being here. And if you're new here, welcome. It's great to have you here. And as always, whenever you interact with content by independent content creators like myself, it actually does influence the AI algorithm, recommending this video to other people in their feed, spreading it out to a wider audience. Whenever you interact with the content, it does signal to the algorithm that it is something worth spreading to a larger audience. So thank you in advance. So it is Monday. It's the 25th. We're officially in Scorpio season now. It's going to kick off even stronger once Mars, the co-ruler of Scorpio, also enters into the sign of Scorpio, the zodiacal sign of Scorpio, not the constellation of Scorpio. That would be sidereal or Vedic astrology. Also, that has its place. But when we talk about tropical or Western astrology, we are using mathematics and geometry and an equal 12 parts of the sky to figure out which section of the sky each of these signs represents. So when Mars is the co-ruler of Scorpio, will be in Scorpio in just a matter of days into the later part of the week, into the weekend. It's going to kick off even more. So the feeling of community is it's the basic signature here of Scorpio, right? Because Scorpio represents the resources or the power that is created when we come together. So communion, cooperation, any kind of resources that are created from any relational interaction. So in a marriage, you have domestic resources. In a sexual relationship, you have the sexual alchemy and the power dynamics that exist in that type of relationship, which means there's inevitably going to be intimacy and trust and the possibility of breaking that trust. We also find in Scorpio as an archetype that we go into our own shadow, right? We look at ourselves in the mirror. We look at the relationship we have with ourselves and the dualistic nature within us. And we have to walk through the mirror of ourselves and really accept that other aspect of who we are, the shadow part of who we are. There cannot be any light without the darkness in which to be in. So you can interpret that many different ways. And I would recommend that you are not finding yourself attached to any one view of reality, because I have found even in the most recent past, in the last couple of days, it is so easy for it to shift if you just take a little bit of time and investigate a little deeper, and you'll find that there's a whole new layer. This is a conversation that I've been having with someone and multiple people, of course, but it's really been coming through in the last couple of days of just like when you feel that you kind of have a handle on things and you feel like you know what it is. And this is the perfect analogy here for the transition from Libra into Scorpio, right? Because in Libra, from a mental perspective, you feel like you have a handle on things. You feel like you do understand to a certain degree what it all means, how to live in balance and harmony. It's like you have the keys of wisdom to the function of the universe and then ready to apply it. And it's really important to embrace that when we go into Scorpio time, because this is much more about the depth of the feeling and the experience of being in a relationship of any kind and to work together, because that is way different than the mental perspective of that. So there's a couple things that I want to bring up today as we venture through this transmission, just some things that have come up in my reality. So I want to check in with the chat and the stream here. Good morning, Emily. it is important to check in with each other. So I hope you're doing well, and you had a great weekend, and you don't stop, you haven't stopped, you have not stopped questioning the fabric of reality, because it's gonna start getting very real now. And I know I've been saying that, but this, and it's like this every year, right? Scorpio time is like this every year, but we're in a very unique position here. So there's a couple of things that I want to bring up and show you. First of all, let's just take a moment here to look at the Schumann, because I think that we'll see that the amplitude got very strong over the weekend. So you can see that today's the 25th, the 23rd, 24th, and you'll see here, like on Friday, right? You can see that it blasted up to 55, getting very, very loud. And if you scroll down just a little bit, you can see some of these patterns unfolding, but also some differences in the patterns that I really want to point out to you. Number one, so we see this massive jump in amplitude across the board, right? All of the lines here are following exactly the same pattern in the amplitude. That doesn't always happen. You can even see that happening today as of right now, really, that you can see that the white line here is increasing in amplitude again, but the others are much more mellow, whereas this one right here and this one right here from Friday followed very similar patterns. So there was a very strong increase in the amplitude, right? The wave got very big. It got very loud on Friday. And I think that really did carry over through the weekend, because you can see that Saturday or Sunday into today. This is Saturday, my bad. Sunday into today was very, very chill in terms of the amplitude, but you do also see that the quality increased significantly at this point. So one thing I want to show you, as per usual, right? The amplitude increases and the quality is pretty mellow, except for the red, right? It takes a big dip. So every time that the amplitude increases, this particular line, the red line, seems to drop in quality significantly. Now, some people I've heard talk about how the red line in particular represents the material aspect, the material matrix, the 3D aspect. I haven't done enough research and really run it through my analytical system to really say for sure if that is the case or not. I think to say that definitively is misrepresentation, because there's no way to really know what this is in terms of those types of things. But, we can always investigate and come up with our own conclusions, which is really what we have now. That is in fact our best tool at this point, because what I am finding, the more that you go down into the depths, and Scorpio season is all about going down into the depths, right? You are gathering the courage and the capacity to sink down into the abyss in order to really see, right? Tumbling down the rabbit hole. And in some ways, I get that sense from this right here, that it is like a tumbling down of the rabbit hole. And so the amplitude of the electromagnetic field gets very loud, right? It blasts. It's like a trumpet or some other instrument that's like putting a lot of volume forward. And 55 is pretty significant when you think about how it hangs out right around here at about 7 or 8. So for it to get that loud in amplitude is pretty significant. And then to have this drop off like this and then to immediately come back up, I think that there is definitely something to this. And you see it again, not so much right here, but a little bit right here, but also over here where it spikes a little bit more and it drops down again. So whatever this is, I'm interested in learning more about it when I have like a moment of any time. But what we'll also see here, which I think is an interesting deviation. Let me make sure here that we are looking at the same thing. So we know, here's the frequency, the actual frequency. And we've talked about this already, right? This is the pitch. And so when the frequency lowers, the pitch lowers, right? That means the frequency or the oscillation per second is slower. So the pitch is lower. What we're finding, normally what we talked about, what we saw in terms of a pattern was that when the amplitude increases, the pitch drops. When the pitch drops, and in order to keep the quality consistent, you have to increase the amplitude. We talked about that on Friday. Now, what is interesting here is you see that this amplitude comes, let's just say here, like between 11 and 13 UTC. That's the time, 11 to 1 p.m. UTC. So we see here that when the amplitude went up, so did the frequency, except for these two, right? The green and the red frequency dropped considerably, but we also see that, which goes along with with what we have been looking at in terms of patterns, but we do see that this main frequency shot up. And so the pitch went up, the amplitude went up, and we find that the quality it was variable, right? It depended on which line here you were looking at. But this is a different pattern than what we've been seeing. So I think that's really interesting. So yes, the pitch drops, the frequency drops here and here, but it actually increased, right? The pitch increased, the frequency increased up to almost 8 hertz, which is a pretty significant change when you're looking at a steady kind of 7.5-ish, 7.3, 7.4. So I think that's very interesting. As the quality dipped in some ways, you see that this pitch, all right, the frequency, the oscillations per second went up. And where else did that happen? It happened again right here with this other spike on Sunday, right? About 1 p.m. Or 1 a.m. UTC, right? So it was still kind of late Saturday night, here in the U.S., depending on where you are. But we see again that the quality of the red line dropped, and we can see the frequency spike again, and then these two dropped here. So there's some variability here that's coming outside of our model, and this is an incredibly I just put this together now. This is an incredibly synchronous start to a larger subject that I want to talk about today, before we get into the intuitive reading and the astrology, of course. And it all comes together, just like the community, the feeling of community. So you can see here that this also spiked up pretty strong when there was no amplitude, just the quality changed. And then there's the frequency kind of doing its thing. And then again, dropped really significantly while this was in, and this one dropped too. And then there was another spike in the frequency right before this spiked again in amplitude. So there's different variables at play here that are impacting the information that we're seeing. So this is a very interesting connection to what I want to talk about as well today, because and this is something that's a very new, I wouldn't say it's a new concept in general. And some of you might be like, yeah, I know all about statistics, and so this makes sense to me, and in fact I can explain it better. That would be great. It's been a long time since I've took any statistics, which is a requirement whenever you do any kind of research in academia. You have to understand statistics so you can understand how to develop in order to develop any kind of research project. So what I want to talk about today is the Quincunx, right? Because we talk about the Quincunx in astrology. It has a very specific meaning to it. It has a symbol, and it represents a very specific type of interaction energetically and geometrically. But what I didn't realize as I was actually doing some research around the concept of the regression to the mean, which is a statistical reference, is that the Quincunx actually directly relates to this statistical phenomenon. And I feel like this is really important to bring up because we are, a lot of times you can find that we're all in certain ways, depending on where you are putting your attention and your research focus and what you're attaching to in terms of what is real, and very specifically this concept of creating reality. and what that actually, and what actually influences that, and if it's even influencing that, because I think this is something we really need to explore. And I'm not saying it does or it doesn't. I've had my opinions about this. I've talked about this, and that it's much more about a resonance that you attract, as opposed to creating anything out of thin air, or anything like that, in terms of using your thoughts, and you're focusing your thoughts necessarily on creating something, as opposed to your resonance, your vibratory resonance, your frequency being a match in terms of what template you want to institute that will eventually bring into reality some sort of material manifestation, if that makes sense. I know that was really that was like a mouthful, but trying to understand these mechanisms of manifestation and creation and the law of attraction, because these types of concepts are, just like so many other things, utilized in order to keep us from actually being aware of our own divine nature, and what we're capable of, and what what is the purpose of life, and why are we here. So I want to talk about this Quincunx, and then we'll get into the intuitive part of the transmission and the astrology, and really relate it to a very tangible concept, especially going into Scorpio season, which is the feeling of community and what's created as the result of a cooperative effort. Because certainly the sum of our parts is greater than what each of us individually can accomplish on our own. And I think that this is really what is important to realize about the law of attraction, and how we each are adding our input, and what our focus is, and what the goal is. And so this is new territory for me in terms of the way that I'm processing it. So if it seems a little disjointed or like not fully worked out, it's because it's not. But I'm with you on this journey too, and my role here is to share my experiences and filter it through the language that I am using, which is astrology and archetypal language, to explain and to understand a larger experience of being human. So I want to show you a couple images here when it comes to the Quincunx, and then I'll explain regression to the mean for those of you who don't quite understand what that is. So let's look at a couple things here. I'm going to minimize this over here, and we're going to look at a couple images. So first I want to show you, this is the Quincunx symbol for astrology, right? So because you have all the symbols, right? The conjunction, the square, which is pretty obvious. The trine is the triangle. The sextile is like an asterisk almost, right? It's got the 6-pointed star, but it's not necessarily drawn that way. It doesn't connect all the lines. It's more like an asterisk. So, and then you have the Quincunx, right? So here's our 150-degree angle. Or to break it down into a fraction, a Quincunx is 5/12, right? So you can tell then from an astrological perspective, or looking at the astrological calendar, a Quincunx represents 5 signs or 5 houses away from the original position, right? And there was a really important Quincunx yesterday between the sun and the north node of the moon that's really important to address, because it's really factoring in a lot of where we've been and where we're going. And it's very related to Scorpio. It's very related to a sense of where we've been and what we've accomplished so far together, and releasing a lot of the individualized ego-based manifestation and creation that is an integral part of the individual's development. But once you get to the top of the chart, as we're going to look at, Libra to Pisces, right? It's all about our relationship to other. And that's where the learning, that's where the growth comes from. And I think it's important to consider consider, what is it that we are here to do? Because I think that we get kind of hyper caught up in like manifesting for our own quote unquote abundance, and not realizing that if we work together with a goal, if we put that energy towards something way more than just meeting our abundance needs and what we consider abundance needs. And of course that is something that is variable. That's something that changes from person to person. Anyway, so here's the symbol for the quincunx. You see what it seems like is there's a very distinct line here, this horizontal line, and then you have two aspects that are going off in seemingly different directions. So 5/12. It's a fraction that doesn't make any sense. 5 does not divide, into 12 at all. 5 is a prime number, right? It's only divisible by itself and 1. So adding it, well, that's not true. That's actually, I'm going to back that up for a minute. Let's get away from that for a second. Let's go back to the 5/12, which is a fraction that is not balanced, right? And that's what the quincunx represents. These things that don't fit together, seemingly don't fit together. The 5/12 or the 150-degree angle, they don't seem to fit together. Yet they do fit together when we make an adjustment or allow an adjustment to happen. So this is the symbol for the quincunx. Now, when you start to unpack this a little bit more beyond astrology, you realize that the quincunx actually has a lot of other features, or is represented a lot of different ways. Well, here's one quincunx right here, the 5 on a die or a dice. 4 aspects on the outside. Oh, look at that. And a circle in the middle. That looks like the alchemical symbol for squaring the circle, doesn't it? You have the circle in the middle, and then you have the square representing materialism on the outside. Again, now you start to see that this quincunx is a representation of how do we materially encompass something that is seemingly infinite, right? Which is that circle in the middle, or that 1. Another pattern, which we're going to see here, which was part of the pattern for this, is right here. This is also considered a quincunx, right? Here's your 4 aspects on the outside, and the centerpiece that is connected to all of them, as you can see here, right? You can kind of see this idea that they're all woven into each other. If you follow the pattern, there is a weaving of all of these aspects together that encircle or encompass the centerpiece, or the center point, or the circle, or the sense of infinite self, right? You're starting to see this unravel here. Is the quincunx is not so much that they don't fit together, but it is the representation of how we do make them fit together. How do we hold this infinite nature within a material reality? This is an important piece to understand. And then this is where it gets interesting. Then we get the actual statistical connection. So if this is familiar to you, so it's literally called the quincunx, right? This is the bean graph. And if you are familiar with Plinko, here it is, right? That you put the marbles or the balls or whatever, marbles, balls, some sort of little round thing into the device, and it has all of these this grid, right? All of this grid point, or this grid pattern in the center, and that allows for the dissemination of these all the way down. And what you find is that regardless of where you drop them, what speed you drop them at, and it's seemingly random, but this will create the bell curve pattern every time. And this is called and this represents regression to the mean. And this, you can look up plenty of stuff on the internet about what that means, or some videos if you want to get it described to you in more layman's terms. But the basic idea of regression to the mean is that most of these variables are going to tend towards an average, okay, which is what this bell curve represents, is an average of distribution. So even though it's seemingly random when you put these in at the center, and I think that's what's important to realize, that they are coming down into the center, that even though it's random distribution along this grid, it still follows a very specific distribution pattern of the bell curve, which means that most of the variables that are coming down through this grid pattern are going to find themselves settled in the middle, or the mean, the average. Now, of course, there are outliers, and of course, there are variables that are on the outside of this curve that's inevitable, right? They're not going to stack necessarily up in just this one column here. It's going to be distributed over this larger area, but everything comes down to this distribution. And the regression to the mean represents the idea that sometimes statistics can be very misleading, because we erroneously may attribute what is a natural distribution to an average, right? To a specific type of input that actually has nothing to do with where it lands, right? So you would perhaps attribute a certain set of stimulus to one of these marbles, or any number of things, and find that it's still going to follow a normal curve, a bell curve, a normal average distribution pattern, no matter what. But because you added this element into it, and it still gave you the outcome that's going to happen anyway, you erroneously believe that this is the case. You're starting to see here what this really references, right? That in nature and mathematics, right? We're talking about geometry, we're talking about mathematics, and both of those things are connected to natural law, right? Physics and mathematics are part of their natural law, right? And so statistics can be used to manipulate us or anything, right? Statistics can be used to manipulate the outcome of a study or a conclusion, because we think that because of the introduction of a certain type of response, giving us some sort of outcome, right? We would think that it is because of this that is giving this the outcome. So there are lots of different things that you can attribute this to. But the one example that I found in regards to this from a specific video is that there was the idea that positive reinforcement increases your performance, right? So you perform badly on some task, and the idea is that positive reinforcement of what you've done right or whatever is going to then lead to you doing something in particular that is an improvement. But then the Israeli army, for instance, or the Israeli Air Force found that it was actually negative feedback that encouraged or had an impact on pilots executing a specific maneuver or specific training protocol, showing improvement after negative feedback, right? And so the statistical analysis here, or the conclusion you could draw on that at that point, is that, well, it's actually the negative feedback that is allowing for our pilots to do better on the next round. The reality is that regardless of your feedback, based on the distribution of this, the bell curve, the distribution along the average, no matter where you randomly go through this grid pattern, that the natural tendency is to improve because you've done something wrong, or you didn't execute something as well as you could have. And so the natural progression is for you to learn from that and to do better, and it will naturally find this average point. Okay. And so, but because of that, and you say, oh, I introduced negative feedback, and it actually led to the pilots doing a better job the next time around. The reality is they would have done a job next time around regardless of the feedback, but because we introduced this feedback and it gave us the result, it's confusing, not even confusing correlation with causation, but even confusing correlation with the natural distribution of all of these experiences. So this is also called a quincunx, and it's kind of like, you almost can see it if you turn this upside down. It probably look even more, it would look more like this if you turned it upside down, or if you turn this upside down, it would look like the quincunx, which is that you are going to get this center point no matter what. Right? That is the law of statistics here, the distribution of the mean, right? The bell curve. And this is easily seen in linear regression, right? If you plot all of these variables on a particular map, for instance, or on a graph, you'll find that linear regression that gives you an actual formula. It's the same thing, right? It's going to follow this distribution pattern of the bell curve. Anyway, you're still going to get what's here in the center, and it has a lot to, what's surrounding it is all of the different experiences. You're still going to get the centerpiece, right? You're still going to get this distribution no matter what. Does that mean that we shouldn't do anything? No, I mean, you want to still put the marbles into the Plinko machine and have enough data to show you what the average is. And I think that that's something that we really, really need to start embracing right now, is that it's not so much about us creating anything or us actually manifesting anything. It's the idea that it has much more to do with what is the experience as we're going through the Plinko, as we're going through the grid pattern, our experiences and what we're learning and where we're bouncing to and everything else. It's still going to come out in the same distribution pattern. It sounds very similar to the idea of nothing can stop what is coming. So does this mean we shouldn't be doing anything? No, that's certainly not it, because we want to be completely aware and cognizant and present as we go through the grid. And not everybody's going to be right in the middle. There will be outliers, but there's still an average. And most people are going to, or most experiences through this are going to find the average. It's called the bell curve, right? And this is how many experiences, when you put enough variables in this way, where they're going through one singular point, right? Everything's coming down the chute to go out in one point, and then everybody's experiences are different, but it's still going to find a basic distribution pattern. So what is important appears to be what is happening on the outside here. What do we do? Who do we surround ourselves with? What do we surround ourselves with? That seems to make a lot of the difference here. So that is something that's been coming into my awareness quite a bit recently. So I wanted to share that, and I'm curious if anybody has any experience with statistics and can explain that better, or have any feedback about that. But in the meantime, we can start getting into the reading here. I'm going to move myself over here. All right, my friends. Nope. So you can already tell that the formatting is going to be totally bunk now that I've been moving things around. So there we go. Move over. There we go. Appreciate your patience. You'd think that I would figure this out already, and I have. This is just not my strongest suit. I mean, I think about 2 years ago what I was trying to do, and like this seems like such a huge upgrade considering where all of this started. So we're gonna come into this here very soon. Here we go. The 10 of discs. There does appear to be what I've been picking up on. See, there's a futility here that ultimately is way more focused right now on the end of a material cycle that, again, is not really to our liking. We either want more, we've gotten lazy and complacent. We certainly, maybe we need to add some more emotionality and some more thoughtfulness rather than getting hyper fixated on what the material aspect, which is going to be a little difficult because you can see here that the two poles of our vertical axis of power here are very much rooted in the physical material reality. And so again, we are collectively very fixated on the nuts and bolts of our society, of our reality, what we're manifesting, what we are identifying as abundance and security, right? All of those things. And it's not that those things are not important. They're kind of make up everything that we are engaged with. But as we are in Scorpio season now, we're really going to have to start, if we haven't already, really taking that deep dive in some ways into what we create together and what that means. And maybe be willing to suspend some of what we have accumulated so far in terms of our experience so that we can address what we are creating together. And this is something that's been on my mind now for a little while in terms of, we think and we believe that when we're doing certain things, that we believe that they're good and that we believe that they're on the right path. And if we fulfill ourselves and our abundance, that ultimately that's going to turn around and reverberate out. And I'm not suggesting that that's not true. And that of course we should be taking care of ourselves and doing the work within ourselves to attract what it is that we need. But it seems that we really need to be focusing on what we are creating, for better or worse, together. So, and there is a sense here, the moon's very involved right now. Of course, the moon's moving in from Gemini into Cancer today. And so she is at home in Cancer. So the feels are going to get very strong. And this is reflected today in this reading too, because the 7 of Swords is the moon in Aquarius. The 2 of Swords is the moon in Libra. So there's a lot of feelings about this that are going to come forward, I think. And we'll get into that with the astrological portion in a minute. So 10 of discs, wealth, right? Mercury and Virgo, everything we've accumulated based on our works, based on our labor, based on our discipline and devotion, all of those Virgo type of energies and references. But again, it's reversed. So we're coming from a place here where the cycle has completed and turning over. But again, there's resistance to that. Maybe it's not enough for us. Maybe we're getting lazy and kind of complacent about it because we've gotten everything that we feel like we need, or being really fixated on the physical aspect of all of this. And I said, and blinded by it, right? About the greed and the wealth and wanting more and being hyper fixated on what can I get for myself? What can I get for myself? What can I do with my labor? What can I accumulate? What kind of wealth can I accumulate with my labor and my works? And even my own self-discipline. That it even gets down to that point. We need to, and there's a need here when this is reversed, that we, to shift our focus onto more emotional aspects or more scientific aspects, so we don't get literally buried under the physical reality of things. And that's also a big part of this when it's reversed, that we need to balance some things out so that we aren't like literally buried under the weight of everything we've accumulated as a result of our labor and our works. And that's really important to consider, because just because there's wealth doesn't, there is a weight to that as well. There is something there that, we have to, there's gravity that exists with mass, right? And regardless of what kind of wealth you are accumulating, you still, if you're not able to let go of the cycle that started, right? Just like when the plant lets go of the fruit that all of its growth and labor have created in order to release the seed for the next cycle. This is not releasing the seed into the next cycle. This reversal is truly about holding on to it and wanting more and more and more. And this is our causal factor coming into this moment. I think that there's a lot of people who are blinded by their greed and their wealth, obviously, but we also have to consider within ourselves where this is manifesting as well. This is it's real easy to just externalize this to other people and not consider where we are falling into this, but we should. I would say, I think it's important that we are acknowledging that the cycle is ending regardless, and we have to be mindful about where our resistance is to that, where we're holding on when we don't need to, and we can't really. I mean, you can't hold on to, you can certainly hold on to all those resources and put them in a storehouse and never do anything with them, but then you're just, again, buried by all of your assets that are really meant to be offered. They're meant to be offered up. They're meant to be given. They're meant to be, put forward as part of a collective or social context. And this is not doing that. This is, hoarding it, basically. So then we come into the heart of the moment here. Where am I here? Sorry, guys. Here we go. Where we have the Seven of Swords. So the moon in Aquarius is futility. So we know the sevens, right? Every reading, there's a seven that's making itself known. And the seven is that it's kind of like the Quincunx, right? It is this adjustment we have to make around the infinite, right? In terms of being able to embrace it, embody it, come to terms with it in some ways, if we're going to think about it, the regression to the mean and the bell curve. And there is a futility when you think about, when you go into the chute, for instance, like you're playing Plinko, that there's really nothing that you can actually do in that context that's going to change the distribution curve. It is random, right? What happens is random as it goes through the grid system. So what you do in terms of before that is really, it has no bearing on how it unfolds. And so there is a futility in the mind that can really be, that you can really relate to that particular aspect. And this is really, you can see that it's facing this 10 of discs that's reversed, right? And so the futility, or the Seven of Swords, is, it's really the unmasking of illusions and unmasking of disguises, and there's intentional confusing that goes along with the Seven of Swords. There is trickery, there's deceit, there's cheating. There is this, the mind will do what it needs to do in order to bypass reality if it is... if we're coming to a point of having to just give in or give up, right? There's that divine intervention that comes from the fall, right? The seven. And so the swords, every other suit here, every other element really is reaching their wall. But at least with the swords, you can even see on the card, right? Like all of these different ideas that are attempting to have an impact. But at the end of it all, there is this one centralized... and look, he's got a little circle there as well. There's a one centralized thought form or perspective that you can't get around. Despite all of your best mental tricks in order to try to bypass it in some way. So there is this sense here that what is coming to an end, despite there being a real strong grasping of what needs to be let go of in some ways, that our mental process here in the middle, like this is really where it's directed to, is like, it's kind of futile. It's we can use our minds all day to try to, like, again, bypass it all, but there is there is an unmasking that happens here, right? You have to see and mentally be exposed to the reality of the situation. This is what the Seven of Swords represents. That it's literally double-edged, as you can see, and no matter what ideas you attempt to throw at this perspective, there's no getting around it. And it's really focusing here on where we've come from. So I do feel like that this is where the focus actually is what, for as much as we want to collectively, right? Collectively, we want to hoard all of how far we've gotten. We want to hoard it and not let go of these perspectives or what is giving us a sense of wealth. And I would say this has a lot to do with our perspectives. And this is why this conversation that's been coming forward especially in the last couple of days for me with other colleagues is like, once you get to a point where you feel like it's like something gets thrown at you and like you're on a whole new level now, right? Like you thought that the rabbit hole ended and all of a sudden you're falling even further down. And with Scorpio being involved now, I assure you that this is, we are embarking on the next layer or the next depth of what is true. And we have to be willing, again, there's that Chiron. We have to be willing to see things with a completely new set of eyes. And I think that there's a real struggle with this because we've gotten so far as a society and as a culture and with specific mindsets and specific things that we've manifested that have gotten us this far. But if we stay attached to those, I think this is where we're really going to struggle. And we're going to struggle anyway, because that's the thing. We have a Two of Swords, which is peace, being reversed as our outcome. Like, regardless of how you look at it, there's going to be a really unsettled frame of mind here that is important to at least acknowledge and accept. So when we look at the Six of Keys, it says the increscent moon, which is the opposite of where we are right now, right? The moon is now in its waning gibbous phase. It is past the full moon. We're now in the last half. We have our third quarter square on the 28th, like right before Halloween. And the 4th is the next new moon, the Scorpio new moon. And remember what that new moon represents is the ability to go into the lab and start putting together seemingly unrelated facts to see if something comes up, right? This is how you invent things. You fuck it up over and over and over. You take the initiative to connect dots that you've never connected before. So in the meantime, though, we have to let go of the dots we've already connected. We have to let go of the image that has already been created as the result of all of our dot connecting, because that's, not the end all be all. So where we're really gathering our energy here is the fact that we're still sculpting something. We're still building something. It's not quite finished yet. But it does represent here that we're drawing our power from a position of like, we are in fact bringing our own vision into form. And this is very much related to the galactic center in Sagittarius, which is, where, Venus is well on her way to, and asteroid Juno is very close as well. And so, there is something here about bringing our own vision into a physical form. There's that quincunx again. There is that literal, like, squaring the circle. There is an infinite part of each of us that we have access to, and being able to bring it into the material somehow, which seems like these two things don't fit together, is where alchemy really comes out. And so we're drawing our personal power really rooted, and even in the subconscious realm, it's not something that's fully realized yet, is that we are in fact sculpting, and it's growing. It's growing, it's coming into form. We actually see a form in front of us, but we're not done working. That's something to consider. We're not done working. And it's important when we get to the guidance points, what it is we're actually building or bringing into form. Each of us is a sculptor, absolutely. This is, again, where this concept of our own individual abundance and manifestation, and taking care of ourselves and doing our own work is very important, because it's like, we need to be able to have a clear vision of what we want to bring into form. But what are we bringing into form is going to be the question we should start asking ourselves. Where we see our attention really focused, though, this goes along with the 10 the 10 of discs that we see, sorry guys, there we go. The 10 of discs that we see is the 5 of keys, wishes fulfilled, but it's reversed as well. So there is seemingly a focus and we have to look at it. We kind of can't get around looking at it when it's reversed, right? Wishes fulfilled is a pretty obvious card of abundance, everything here. And there's that 5, right? There's the 5 in this particular deck. All of them really are kind of like, it's the 5 represents if you reversed the bell curve and it was like a bowl. The 5 is the bottom, right? It is the bottom of the bowl that you have to come out of. Now, it's interesting that in this deck, it is the wishes fulfilled because there's nowhere to go from here when you get everything that you want other than, oh, look at this, the increscent moon, something way more than just your physical material needs being fulfilled. I mean, this is a great card. Who wouldn't want to be here, right? You have all this food. There's a wine. You open the windows and you're in this beautiful valley. Like it's rustic and natural and full of light. And you have the keys right here. Literal keys. There's 2 sets of them too. That's very interesting that there's a black set and a white set of keys. There's a little vase with flowers here. Now, when it's reversed, I mean, it's just showing that we don't feel like that we have all of our needs fulfilled. And here we go again to the 10 of discs being reversed, right? We don't have enough. We want to hold on to what we have. We're not fulfilled. We're not abundant. We are working harder to get to find a sense of abundance and an ability to be physically and materially abundant, so then we can bring our spiritual vision into a form, right? This is interesting that this card comes after this card, that the wishes fulfilled is not the end all be all. It's actually the place that we go up from. But if we are not able to, right now, it seems to me that there is a collective focus on what we don't have. We haven't gotten to this place of abundance where we feel safe, secure, abundant. And some people do, but I would say that collectively, we're really not there. And there's a lot of focus on what we don't have. And we want to hoard what we do have because we don't want to let it go. And when we talk about physical reality, this also does extend to, I think, it does extend to our vision of reality, right? What do we conceive of in reality, in the physical matrix of reality? So maybe we, we have everything that we actually need, and it's just because things aren't manifesting outwardly the way that we think that they should, or that would give us indication that all of our wishes are being fulfilled, that we feel like that we aren't abundant. And where this is ultimately going to lead, right, with the interaction of all of these things, minus the guidance on each corner here, which again is very interesting now that we're talking about the shape of the quincunx, because these 4 on the outside certainly represent that same kind of basic, shape, right? The 4 points on the outside that represent the material square. Because the peace, right? The two of swords, the moon in Libra. So here's the moon again, and it's peace, right? It's the 2 perspectives that meet each other in the middle into, look, oh, a bowl. That's interesting. And there's balance in terms of the geometric patterns that are surrounding it. There's 4 of them. Oh, that's interesting. That is very interesting, right? Here's the 4 and 4. There's 4 of these geometric patterns, and then you have the center point, which is a bowl, right? And then you have these 2 thought forms that are crossing each other, but also meeting in the middle at this point. But when it's reversed, there's a difference, there's disagreement, right? There's not peace of mind. There's different disagreements and differences. There's unresolved tension when it's reversed. And the only thing that's going to calm any kind of opposition is really just cold, hard logic. And when we're talking about cold, hard logic, there it goes back to the futility. So I think that there's a real struggle here with what is, and the what seems to be really coming forward, at least in my perception, in the way that I'm reading and the way that it's coming through is that we collectively are really going to have a hard time finding peace of mind other than through the futility of the unmasking of illusions, and the cold hard logic is the only thing that's really going to allow us to find any peace of mind, especially when we are addressing a vertical axis of our power through material abundance and material means, and what it means to be abundant, what it means to have your wishes fulfilled, what it means to bring your vision into a material form. I think that this is, I think that people are really, really starting to be challenged and kind of brought to, a lot of confusion, and certainly not peace of mind. I think that this really represents how much there's not going to be peace of mind other than through cold, hard logic. And with the Seven of Swords right at the center here, I think that it's a big, I think that it's a pretty distinct possibility that it's only going to come through at this point. The mental perspective, the logic, the reasoning of reality is what to expect, right? So there's some interesting things here to help us along the way. Number one, when we're talking about what vision are we bringing into form? What is it that the Six of Keys, what can guide us? What can, support us on this journey? Well, here's the Eight of Roses, the spiritual community, or a community of like-minded people, the people that you identify. And with a moon in Cancer, this is so important because this really represents not so much a spiritual community, although it does. It's the idea of the lattice work of these very tight familial and intimate bonds that hold us, that support us, and we support others in that as well. We're all part of it, that is locked together and providing a structure that will hold our emotional vulnerability. It'll hold our love and affection for each other. It will hold us so that we can be loyal and faithful to each other, because it's the container of the family structure, the spiritual community, that community of like-minded people. It's what is going to hold us together. And is that the form that is being brought into material reality? That's a really good question. But at the very least, as we are really drawing our power from this concept of we're bringing something into form, we're bringing our own infinite self into form, it's the community that we identify with and find support with that's going to really be a big part of this process. And I can't, when we get to astrology, you're going to see how much it's actually in the astrology right now about this cooperative effort. And I talked about this on the astrology report on Friday, right? The cooperative effort that's going to really assist us in the endurance that we need as we go through, each of us through emotional trials. The moon in Cancer, we'll see. I'll show it to you. And of course, the rattlesnake comes back again. I mean, I don't know how many times we need to see this to understand that everything we're experiencing is an initiation process into fulfilling our purpose as a healer, not only of ourselves, but other people and this planet, and our relationship with this planet and our relationship with each other, right? What it all means, and our relationship with nature, right? Our relationship with God or source or divinity. All of these things are needing healing in some ways. And so, again, this whole experience, whatever it is and what we're really struggling with, again, it is the compassion that is cultivated when we are aware of each other's suffering. And you can be directly involved and aware of somebody's suffering when you love them, when you are connected to them, when you're part of a family or a community that's really tight with each other. You feel what other people are feeling. And so being able to connect into that and not being so hyper-focused on each of ourselves individually and what we want. I'm not saying that that's not important, but we have to find a balance here, because all of the Scorpio energy is going to force it out of us. We have to see how things are affecting other people, how that we're just as much a part of the whole as we are of our individual lives, and that this process being close to people, being engaged with a community or a family, and really focusing on what we can create together is initiating all of us into this process. And each of us can embody this serpent medicine that is really about healing, and the capacity to really gather in and harness this energy for healing. But I do believe that it's much more of a larger social, not even social, more familial, right? The Eight of Roses is very much about the familial bonds. That Moon in Cancer is going to make it really obvious in the next 2 days, because that's where it's going to be. Now, when we are like those wishes unfulfilled, basically, right, the wish is fulfilled but reversed, here's our unicorn. Indulge your creative, imaginative, and magical side through some sort of artistic expression. I think that this is going to become a lot more relevant as the moon comes into a trine with Neptune in Pisces and Pallas Athena in Pisces by tomorrow and the following day. Because that, Neptune and Pisces specifically has a lot to do with a creative imagination, magic, artistic expression, and accessing the inspiration through your dreams and your imagination, right? The Leo energy, or the fifth house, is about the expression of it, right? Being yourself fully. It's the Pisces energy where we are inspired by the muse, because it's something that we connect to that is part of us, but also not part of us at the same time. So if we're having a hard time really recognizing that we have to work harder to get our material needs met, to feel fulfilled, if we're feeling unfulfilled, it's about getting into your creative and imaginative side, right? What is it that you want that you're not getting, or that you think you want that you're not getting? How can you, again, this new moon, how can you put together seemingly unrelated facts in the realm of the underworld in some ways, or depth psychology, subconsciously, all those Scorpio types of things? How can you utilize that space to really come up with things that you may have not come up with before? I think this is really going to assist us in this process, because the old ways of doing things are leaving us feeling unfulfilled and feeling a sense of lack, I think. And with the imagination, right, and the dreaminess of the unicorn, right? What can we bring forward through our imagination, through our willingness to create, or to be inspired, right? Inspired by the muse. And create from that inspiration, as opposed to just expecting to just like hoard what we've already created. And then the Two of Roses also reversed. So we have these two roses on either, in this diagonal type of function here. When it's the Two of Roses, the winged messenger, when it's reversed, I mean, it's really signaling that there is a lot to learn from this, we have this, again, here's the Two of Swords reversed, that peace and the alliance, of distinctly different and separate perspectives is really being challenged emotionally, right? The cold hard logic is what to expect, but there's something to learn here emotionally through that experience that, again, is going to ultimately, if we harness it, will lead to us using our imagination, using our ability to be inspired to create something new, create something magical, right? To get into that state of being inspired by the muse. And even though this is difficult, and it's going to feel difficult, right? I mean, this Two of Swords reversed is not exactly very easy. It's like the only real... it's like the only time that the sword suit is really in any balance that our egos would like. And even that is not very, it still looks the same, but it's upside down. And so again, the Two of Roses in this position too is showing us, we're going to have an emotional response to what this disruption is. This is like a little tea party, and one teacup is knocked over, and it's really far away from the home, right? We're not settled into the home, which is what the Eight of Roses really represents. We're out here surrounded by nature, and you have the messenger of the dove, and then you have the hawk as well that's very predatory. There's something to be learned from this. And it might require that we walk away from what was, right? We're not going to keep getting anywhere necessarily by continuing to argue with each other. And I think this is where the cold logic of the Two of Swords is really going to come into play. So we're going to have an opportunity to make something out of this situation, to be willing to see an opportunity to step away from the conflict because it's really not going anywhere. And perhaps that will allow space to imagine or to be inspired to create something that will allow us to feel like all of our physical material needs are being met and fulfilled. But as of right now, you take these four aspects out of it and it's just the cross here. It's not very easy to deal with right now. And as we get further and further along in Scorpio, the felt reality of these relationships, whatever they are, is going to be darker and heavier and more intense. And so, and it's like I said, it's like this every year. And then you have Mars that's going to come into Scorpio too. So then you're just going to get this infusion of like, I'm going to act on things. And so it's best before that happens, while Mars is still in Libra, transcending everything right now. And we'll talk about this in terms of the astrology, to take ourselves out of, I wouldn't say take ourselves out of the felt experience, but realize there's so much more that we're building right now than what is right in front of us that is appeasing our sense of ego and our sense of, quote unquote, fulfillment in a physical way. So let's move on to the astrology as we unpack this very interesting and, unpack this very interesting day's transmission. It was a pretty busy weekend for me. And all right. So trying to get back in the swing of things after being in a totally different mindset, being in a totally different place, literally in a different place with a different focus, in a hospital. It's just all in a city, in a hospital, surrounded by a completely different demographic of people. It's good. It's good to take yourself out of your comfort zone so you can, interact with reality that you normally wouldn't, in order to be of support to somebody else, of course, but also too, just to like remind yourself of what it's like out there. Thank you. All right, I needed my magic bean juice. So here we are today, our chart for today, which is the 25th. So let's start here. The moon is in Gemini still, right? And so I want to go back actually to yesterday to a very specific connection here, these quincunxes, right? So we saw there's two quincunxes that happened yesterday, which is why I feel like a lot of this is coming forward in terms of the quincunx and what it means in various different spheres of study and reality, because these were pretty significant quincunxes, right? Because you have the sun, which is, the center of our solar system. It really represents where we find our fulfillment and our sustainment, and represents, who we are expressed outward. And the moon's north node, which is the karmic trajectory of us on a soul level, right? Where we're being pulled in order to evolve at a soul level. And everybody is moving in this direction. We are so close to this Pleiadian revival when the moon, the north node, especially when it comes into 0 degrees Gemini, that's Alcyon. Alcyon is the main star of the Pleiades star cluster. So we're very, we're not far off from starting to really get into that zone. And of course, the full moon eclipse is going to be, it's going to provide some sort of like timestamp in some ways for the larger cycles around that. And we will be able to reflect back on the full moon lunar eclipse later in the year, the end of 2021 into 2022. So this quincunx is very important because and I talked about it last week too, but this particular degree of Scorpio is just like all the second degrees. It is the contrast to the distilled essence of what that sign means. And so when we commit which is Libra, right? We're committing to the form of a balanced relationship of peace and harmony within some sort of social context, whatever it is, interpersonal relationship, a society that we're part of. When we move into Scorpio, it becomes very feeling based, and that is that tour bus to hell that I like to refer to the first degree of Scorpio. Well, when we are making that commitment, we are letting go of the individualized focus, right? This is why Scorpio is really important right now to understand. We're letting go of the individualized mechanisms. This is where the ego death happens in the 8th house in Scorpio, because ultimately you're letting go of that one, the ego aspect of yourself, looking at the shadow of who you are and being able to integrate it and get into the depth of these power dynamics, either in your relationships or your relationship to yourself. So the second degree represents it's almost nostalgic, right? Because you do have to let go of what was in order to embark on what you are now going to create with other. And it is nostalgic. And so again, this quincunx here with the moon's north node in Gemini is, there's a nostalgia for what was. And there's also this feeling here that we, of the relationships we've been in the past, what our life used to look like, in the past, and how it was constructed, how we constructed it, the types of relationships we had, what they gave to us, right? What we gathered from those relationships, how they influenced our lives, how they enriched our lives, or how they taught us things. All of those things filter, into this one particular degree. But then we find ourselves on a soul level really being drawn to, just having faith in some ways, which is very interesting because that's actually part of the Scorpio archetype in general. But faith in a mental sphere, right? Where we let go in order to discover something, right? Because that's really what the first half of Gemini is all about, is the discovery of ourselves in this world, right? You start to put together things. You start to learn how to interact with the world. You start learning a language. You start learning skills. You start interfacing with the people around you in your immediate environment, and it allows you to make sense of that environment. You learn how to act, in the 3rd house. You learn how to speak. You learn how to communicate. Gemini in the 3rd house. But in order to discover, there has to be a part of ourselves that's opening to discovering and being open to discovering and having almost like a faith in being given many opportunities to discover as well. And so it's like simultaneously looking at the future or being open to the future, but at the same time, and this is how we, the moon's north node. So this is like a soul level collectively, but then you have the sun that is having us really kind of fixated or focused on, or really expressing ourselves through our creative selves, our sovereign selves, through this nostalgia of what was, right? The fact that we have to kind of break open our ego in order to create something with other, but we are still reminded of what that past situation was, and we still acknowledge that we have to surrender it, but like I said, it's very nostalgic and almost kind of like, oh, I remember that. And so for me, for instance, this has been, especially because I'm now back into living in my hometown, is having these really strong impressions of and astral impressions as well of past friendships, what it was like in high school, blah, 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 blah. And being almost nostalgic, or even kind of like really reflecting very strongly about what those relationships meant to me, how they influenced me, how I got here, and also having a really hard time reconciling that they're gone, right? That there's a completely new set of circumstances now and a new creation that's coming forward that you can't get from where you've been. And so we're really finding ourselves, like expressing ourselves through this, but at the same time, this is where the adjustment needs to be made, is being open to the future, being open to the discovery of new things. And so this quincunx right here was really strong yesterday. And at the same time, it was Mercury and Uranus. Now, a lot of times in astrology, you'll hear that Uranus is the higher octave of Mercury. And I've talked about that too, right? Where Mercury is the function of the mind, the individual mind, whereas Uranus is the function of the collective mind, the third eye opening and being part of the whole from a mental and intellectual perspective, because Uranus rules Aquarius, right? These are both rulers of air signs, but they're also in a quincunx because Uranus is sitting in Taurus, radically shifting and reorienting our connection to the collective mind through very distinct disruptions in what? Our physical reality, our material reality. And that quincunx, again, is needing us to adjust ourselves or transmute or find the center within the structure of physical reality, right? The quincunx, when it comes to and this is the degree of the new moon that we're still in this cycle of, and Mercury's still in its shadow, right? Keep that in mind. It's not going to come out of its shadow till it reaches about where Mars is right now. So we're still in the shadow period of the Mercury retrograde. It's moving direct, but it's still territory that we've already been through. So we're also mentally returning back to this point, which is, how do we find the stillness? How do we find a sense of rest and respite? And how do we find a sense of balance in the midst of a dynamic process that is very likely being created by the function of Uranus, where there is no stability, right? It is just the wormhole and the very rapid going through the wormhole, right? And so again, these two quincunxes yesterday were very powerful and really, really forcing us collectively and individually to adjust ourselves in our thinking and the higher mind and what it means to be awakened or enlightened, or just to have the crisis that allows us to shift our perspective enough to see things from a much wider and much more distinct, right? Aquarius is like the laser, right? It's laser focus. There's all this power and all of this energy that's condensed into one singular focus. That seems to be where Aquarius really makes itself known to me. So these two quincunxes really challenging us right now to adjust our version of reality, and especially because Uranus is making very real changes and disruptions in our material reality. And I think that's what we're holding on to the most right now. How do we even revitalize ourselves from the natural world if the natural world or our abundance or material reality continues to change all the time? I think that's a really important thing to consider, especially because where Mercury is, I mean, this is our ticket, being able to, on an individual mental level, being able to function within while that dynamic process is happening, our own individual minds being able to find that centerpiece and that center point of stillness while everything around us is like, the Schumann resonance is amplifying really loud, or life is just, throwing stuff at us all the time and we don't feel like we're actually grounded at all. This is the opportunity that we were presented right here to be grounded in a mental sphere, right? From our mental and intellectual perspective, which is going to be very difficult considering what the reading really showed was, an impact or an effect or a potential outcome that is really like the cold hard logic is all you're going to get in terms of finding that balance point. In the middle there, as you're surrounded by these spinning pinwheels of reality. And that's something that we've known since the beginning of this lunar cycle, right? That was going to be the intention that we could really set for our own growth, is to find that still point. And now we're surrounded by all of the interactions that are making that, bringing that back to our awareness and our attention. And specifically with where Mercury is sitting yesterday and even today, is drawing our minds and our thought processes back to that point. How can you find your stillness in your mind despite all of these other aspects kind of pulling you in all different directions? So then we come into today, as I said, the moon is in Gemini. So let's back up a little bit here. We're going to find that the moon overnight in Gemini, right? So all of the mental perspectives, all of the options, all of the things that we can discover and explore with Gemini, starting to get to a point in the last decan where we have to start considering solidification, or certainly coming down to a point of rooting ourselves, right? That is what Cancer is. It is the nadir. It is the bottom of the chart. It represents where we are each individually rooted. So, certainly I know I have, over the weekend, really just like in my unconscious, in my subconscious, the intuitive nature, through the dream state and through your own feelings, really like considering all of the possibilities, like just going through it over and over. So when the moon overnight was in this trine to Jupiter, right? This is when we can keep this spiritually creative process of late Gemini, kind of like high above things. There's a lot of imagery about keeping the mind and keeping the perspective kind of like up above things, right? So that we are not completely immersed in the physical reality changing or being distorted or any of those things. When we are able to, if we were able to really, again, be able to keep our own intuitive nature and our feelings kind of like at this creative integration that's above everything else, right? We're kind of like a nest of fledglings up in a tree. This trine to Jupiter in Aquarius, speaking of Aquarius, that is now moving direct, right? Our ability to have a very disciplined control over the natural energy that pervades all of life, right? I just talked about, in order to control that laser that has an incredible amount of power involved in it, we have to be very disciplined. We have to be very practiced, and we have to be taking every opportunity, hopefully, to have practiced it. And that was the retrograde of Jupiter. Now that Jupiter's moving direct, it's like, okay, I'm going to start expanding your options and your opportunities and giving you resources, and we're going for it. And so if we are, while that's happening, if we can keep that part of our individual part of ourselves kind of off the ground a little bit, and letting those processes come together while not completely immersed in the physical, this is where I think this trine really made, we got the most out of it. You can see where it happened overnight, East Coast time. So late last night as well. So that was an opportunity. Again, it's about keeping ourselves kind of like out of the fray as we are starting to really integrate the two polar positions that Gemini represents. Now, right after that is when the moon came into another quincunx, right? This time with Pluto, right? And this is where it gets really difficult, because Pluto is, of course, representing the destruction of the social order of Capricorn, right? The literal matrix of our physical, cultural, institutional reality. What we as a society have literally built, which is all of our institutions, corporate structures, right? The government, large, if you look at Cancer, for instance, as the maternal, protector, the Capricorn is much more paternal. It's a provider. It's the larger structural context. It's formalized. It's crystallized. All these Capricornian nature of things. But so yeah, Pluto's moving direct. It's starting to it's like the mulching mechanism turned back on finally. If you've ever used like a huge wood chipper, for instance, like massive, we just used one last year, and so it took like a really long time to like power it up. And once it got going, you're just putting the debris into the chipper and it's just chipping it out into these tiny, constituent parts that then you can put back, into any, you can use it as mulch and blah, 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 blah. That's, what's what Pluto is doing, is mulching everything down in order to fertilize the ground for new growth in when everything comes back around to new growth in a Capricornian way. And when Venus gets into Capricorn in just a number of weeks, this is going to, and goes retrograde right on top of Pluto, this is going to be something very, very accessible to us at a material level. So that'll be something we can talk about later. But this quincunx here, so while Pluto is doing all of this, right, again, the moon in late Gemini is like, all right, it seems like that they should actually fit together, because this particular degree is like, all right, we're pruning back everything. And we've talked about this before, that you prune a plant, for instance, so that you can have, otherwise it'll just grow, all the vegetative growth will just grow wildly all over the place. And when you prune, you are cutting back what is unnecessary, extraneous, and allowing the growth to be funneled into the most important tendrils that are growing, right? Because you want the plant to put its energy, for instance, into the stems and stalks that are going to produce the best fruit. And so you prune things back. And it's the same thing with the mind, right? You eventually have to start cutting back all of the extraneous thought processes, because eventually when you come into Cancer, you root yourself. You literally plant your flag. You make a decision. That's the nadir. It's like, this is where my roots are. And so when you're rooted somewhere, this is where you're going to stay, and everything else grows from there. And so we're cutting things back. The quincunx, again, is the fact that Pluto is just cutting everything back in a social, institutional, whatever has been provided for us is getting destroyed. And so again, how do we at the same time cut back all of these other potential realms of discovery and expression while everything else is being pulled out from under us? This is another moment of adjustment here that was provided to us, very early this morning as the moon crossed over this point. And it's like, you have to start making moves to cut back all of the growth that's ultimately not going to yield anything, and is just going to take resources. And you can easily look at this as like the consistent, dive down the rabbit hole, and just, your mental processes, and especially from a feeling based and intuitive based with the moon, just all over the place. And so we can't really utilize the real power of transformation of Pluto if we don't find a way to cut back everything else that's extraneous. Like, what's the point? So this quincunx, again, given us an opportunity to adjust ourselves in that moment, because from here, the moon comes into a trine with Mars, right? Another air trine. It comes into a trine with Mars in Libra, right? Mars that is sailing high in the sky, is able to have this really broad, transcendent perspective right now, which is, Mars is at its detriment in Libra, is at its least powerful. So it's very diplomatic. It's very much focusing a lot of that really ambitious, courageous energy on balance and harmony in a social order or a relationship. And so this being able to put that energy in a transcendent, very high reaching and very broad perspective is really helpful with us as we are starting to step out of our comfort zone, right? We're like our comfort zone where we're comfortable, what we're familiar with, and stepping forward, like repolarizing ourselves at an individual and subconscious level. And if this aspect of Mars is if we can keep that part of our individual self, right? Mars represents the divine masculine, but it also represents, the ego will to actualize oneself. If we can keep that perspective in this larger, broader, transcendent position, then we really get a lot of traction with that part of ourselves, that emotional, intuitive part of how we feel, which is to start stepping out of our comfort zone. It's time to start going. It's like the gypsy coming out of the encampment and going into the city. It's going to be uncomfortable and it's not going to be familiar territory, but it's a necessary part of eventually coming to make a very distinct decision about where you belong. You can't really know where you belong until you step out of your comfort zone enough to go explore what else is out there. There's a repolarization that is being brought forward, and Mars, it's so important right now that we have this really fiery part of ourselves, that really ambitious masculine part of ourselves that's willing and able to be like an airplane that's sailing high above the clouds. So you get the full, not even above the clouds, but so you get the full picture and not so invested emotionally and with our ambition, right, into the process while we each individually are making this journey outwards again. And it really ends here with the moon coming into Cancer today and then coming into this beautiful trine with the sun and Scorpio. And this is where we realize that we can't actually come together until we come together. And it's going to be the cooperative effort here that is represented by the sun, right? The house raising party, the community coming together to assist each other. We're not going to really, if we can express ourselves through this, again, where the moon is at 2 to 3, I'm going to go back a minute. There we go. 2 to 3 degrees of Cancer. This is about the testing of the will, the need to overcome stagnation and cold during a trial of endurance. And so the way that we're each individually going to be able to do this is through this expression, through our cooperative effort with each other. If we can come together, and there's that 8 of Roses right there, right? The Sangha, the community, right? That comes together and all comes together to support something that's going to make the community more whole and better. And we're going to do that. We find our expression through that. We also find a lot of balance and support with each of us individually having a very significant test of our will. And that's the thing about Cancer. You make a decision about something, you find yourself rooted and you're like, this is where I belong. I'm going to raise this flag. There's a point of no return that goes along with this. And then everything builds from there, and you get tested on how strong those roots are. It's going to come through an acknowledgement, an expression of self through this cooperative effort, which is why it's really important. I mean, it's like we're losing things so that we can realize how important these relationships and the community at large really is to all of our success. And that became very clear to me over the weekend about, my dad's healing is directly related to the fact that we are all so engaged in the process. I mean, my mom hasn't left his side for weeks and weeks and weeks, and for me to just like give her a break and switch her out, like he's never without his family being right with him, as much as it might annoy him. But you know what I mean? As much as I do, that it's really that relationship and the power of a collective effort. This is why prayer in collective worship, for instance, right? It's one thing to engage with bhakti yoga and the devotional yoga as an individual, but boy, when we come together and we are all focused on the same thing, there's nothing that can stop us. There's nothing that can stop us but ourselves, really, and working against this. So I do feel like that there's a testing of the will. I do feel like what to expect is some really, cold, hard truth, and the fact that, we're trying to hold on to something that really does need to be released in terms of an individual or ego structure. And thank God Mars is in the late degrees of Libra that is really balancing out what otherwise could, once Mars comes into Scorpio, it's going to be a different story entirely. You know, the courage and the bravery and the hunger and the drive to go down into the depths is going to get very, very strong. So right now we have to acknowledge for ourselves what it is that's really giving us our strength. And is it us, or is it our relationship to each other? And I would argue that it's our relationship to each other. It's our communal relationship, not anything else. Nothing else that's going to happen. Nobody's going to, what gets disclosed, what happens in certain political arenas, what happens in even economic arenas, all of that brings us back to our most important resources, each other, and our relationship to each other. And I think that this Scorpio season is going to be really powerful in terms of disclosing a lot of that. Plus, a lot of secrets coming to light. I've already seen this in certain circles in terms of like a particular person that has been, had infiltrated another specific group and just outed herself not that long ago for being an infiltrator. And she got very close to a lot of key players in this particular arena, and you're going to see more of that. You're going to see more of that type of disclosure coming out and secrets coming forward. And again, our power is really with each other, so it really depends on how you respond to that as well. So I'm going to check in with the chat here, see what's going on, and the stream. It looks pretty good. So you guys, I'm going to leave it there for today. Thank you so much for being here. I truly appreciate each and every one of you. So if you want to get on my mailing list and you're not interested in social media as much, and I totally get that, you can go to catalystenergies.net. That's in the description box below. Flash page pops up. You can just put your email in, and I send out about 3 emails a month. And it's usually, if I'm offering anything new or just to kind of check in, I'm going to start some new things, and that's where I'm primarily going to be releasing them, is through email. So you can do that, or you can connect through social media, Telegram and Facebook. That's also in the description box below. I'm extending my reading sale of How Does It End, which is an astrological reading based on your personal chart up till the end of 2021. I'm extending that sale up till the 4th, up to the next new moon. So if you book between now and the 4th, it'll be $99, and we look through everything up until the end of 2021. So you can book through catalystenergies.net, go to the services tab and go to the bottom and fill out the form, or you can just email me directly, and that'll work as well. That email is in the description box below as well. And remember, whenever you interact with content like this, it really does actually support the work. And if you want to financially support the work, you can also access Subscribe Star. It's in the description box as well, and you can start subscribing, and soon there will be some very specific subscriber only types of transmissions and reports and interactions that I really want to bring forward. There's only so many hours in a day, and there are so many different responsibilities that I have right now, including people's readings. So getting more of the business end of things attended to in terms of growth has been kind of hard. But, honestly, let's be honest about what we're doing here is like, this is, especially in the Northern Hemisphere, we're in fall, right? Things are contracting. We're in a yin phase right now. And so I'm not suggesting that I shouldn't be building my business or nobody else should be building it, but I'm not surprised that right now it seems to just be kind of pulling in and, utilizing what we have already in order to support each other. So I love you guys. Thank you so much for being here. Truly appreciate each and every one of you. And we'll connect tomorrow for the Daily Medicine transmission for Tuesday, October 26th. Have a great day. I love you guys. God bless. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.